Welcome to a brand new episode of Manage to Retain with Sherri and Lou. Sherri and Lou, how are you all doing today?
Doing awesome, doing fantastic.
Good.
How about you, Vinay?
I'm doing fabulous. I had 2 days in December, which were in the 60s and 70s. I don't know. I don't know if that's global warming, but man, it was fabulous. I don't know what that
is. That's all right. That's good. You got to take it when you can.
That's right. So today we're going to do a little bit of a talk about this idea of employees and kind of what happens with employees as you manage them as a leader, because obviously you don't want them to leave. And there's so many nuances there to unpack in that whole relationship, leader to employee, owner to whole company. Yeah. So I first wanted to kind of stop and check in with Sherri and Lou. And actually not check in, but more just say, Sherri and Lou, why don't we start out first and tell everyone a little bit about what you guys do so that as we go through this, they understand a little more about where you're coming from.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for giving us an opportunity here. Yes, we're Sherri and Lou. We are the Lou-Everett group, and we are business and executive leadership coaches and corporate trainers. And we focus specifically on leadership development and effective communication for small businesses. And we do that by providing actually very direct strategies with our proprietary coaching method and our system that we have to really help build leaders from within. We really help with the work culture to make it a positive experience. And we also provide compliance training such as diversity and inclusion. So we love transforming today's leaders, which is all what we're talking about today with Vinay's lovely data that he's combined. Mm-hmm. So I love it.
Yep. Love partnerships like this for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's probably worth bearing out a little bit of kind of why this started to happen is while Sherri and Lou do focus on what I'll call the softer side of people as opposed to the data side of people, kind of the emotions and sort of those internal self-limiting beliefs. I do, Vinay Raman, as focus as the CEO of Karmo on the data. Because, Sherri and Lou, we've talked about this before. The human body is not just skin and flesh and muscles and stuff and organs and stuff. It's also the bones. You can't have the body without the bones. You can't have it without the flesh. But the two of them together, that becomes the human body. And when we start talking about the stories that are happening within the people, we can also start to take a look at the data. And those two together, when you start to see them as the part of the whole, gosh, magic comes alive. So I focus on the data side of this. So
right.
Agree.
I want to kind of start out first and talk about this idea of leadership. It's a really difficult thing to kind of pin down. It moves around for everyone. Sherri and Lou, have you seen that too with all the clients and customers that you have?
Oh yeah, because you think about it, right? There's so many things that impact not just business but everybody's everyday life. And the reality of it is, and I was just having a coaching session with a client this morning about employees and about their employees and the differences and the nuances of performance level at times does change depending on what is going on externally, right? Are not only internally culture-wise for our company, but externally in their life and in the environment that they have to deal with every single day. And things that we may or may not have full control over as a person. But we certainly can have some manipulation and ability to manage as a leader and changing of perception, which I'm sure that will lead us right into what we're talking about today.
Yeah, I think I'm going to say one last thing. Someone said, I heard this at a wedding speech actually, and it was actually the grandmother of the bride who said, I've learned. She was 93 years old and got up and gave a speech, and she said, I've learned throughout my life. You can spend most of your life worrying about the 95% of the things that you can't control, or just focus on that 5% and you'll live the richest life in the world.
That's right.
Which I think is a perfect way to head into this. So what I'm going to do here in a second is I'm going to share my screen so you all can see a graph of how a particular employee is showing up. And you may have seen this before, but I think we're going to give them a little bit more as to how, as a leader, you can start to see that and do something with it. So give me a moment here and I'm going to share the screen.
Certainly.
All right. Can you all see what I have here?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep. Perfect.
Actually, you know what? I think I might have to zoom in. So I'm actually going to leave it in like this so we can zoom in a little bit more. So we've got this employee named Chris She's been a technician for 1 year at this company. And what we did is we went ahead and presented this data. You probably already have a lot of this data, these KPIs already in your company. It's just you may not have presented in the exact same way. So we took a graph here over some period of time and said, this is how she's performing. And let me orient you to this real quick. The best case scenario is this blue area, which is how Chris actually is performing. That blue area is what he or she is actually doing, that person in your organization. Best case scenario is if that blue fill up the whole thing. So the blue is a gigantic circle that went all the way to the edges. That would be a fantastic, your superhero employee. Well, fact of the matter is that likely there's never any employees that are 100% on every dimension. They've got strengths and they've got their weaknesses. Right? They're effective and ineffective. This green shows you what we'll call the highly effective people who get the B or better on the test, if you will. So on this weekly total vehicle distance, weekly or actual stops made, average stops per day, the people who kind of hit those numbers have been doing really well. Now you can see this is heavily nuanced because there's lots of different areas. This black line right here, this black dotted line is the average, what the average employee is doing in your organization. I'll also suggest to you that's kind of the shape of your culture. That is what is expected in your organization, what people have come to believe is expected in your organization.
Right.
And this red dotted line in the middle here is what I'll call the low performers. You can see on this actual stops made, there's a lot of room for improvement for Chris here to do a little bit better. Same thing with idle time. These are places where there's lots of room for improvement. Safe acceleration, this average percentage of the day that they're actually working, she tends to be doing on the much better side, but there's some areas for improvement. Sherri and Lou, we've gone through this graph before or something very similar to it. I mean, what does this tell you as a leader right here? What can you do? What can you act on by just seeing this kind of stuff?
Well, number one, you got to find out why, right? That's our number one goal as a leader is like, we look at this and say, well, why is this happening?
What's the story? Everybody has a story, and then the data is a great way to at least start the story, right? Because it's really objective, and that's really the best way to go about it, and then move into a conversation. It's a great way versus like, well, this is what I see, and being that like one way or one perspective, it's like whoa, time out. Wait, here are some metrics that. This is what it's sharing. This is what I'm seeing, right. And there's no discrepancy. Like you can't hide behind the metrics, right?
Right, and so it's
just a start.
It's just a start, right? Because as a leader, we've got to be open. We've got to be open and available to different perceptions of why the data is the way it is. And in Chris's case here, as an example, they're amazing at some of these things. They over excel in safe acceleration, and they're really good at average vehicle work day per day, and other avenues here, average distance between stops and et cetera. So it's so easy for leaders. And I've seen this often. And I will say I've made this mistake myself before as a new leader. When I was a new leader is I look at this and immediately we go to where? The weak points. We always look at the opportunities. I mean, let's be real. All right, listeners, darn well that you looked at this graph and say, whoa, they're really doing really terrible in this space and in that space. It's so easy to do. Right? Even Vinay, right off the bat, you're like, as you can see, actual stops made, it's not doing real well, right? Because why? Because we know that majority of our listeners are going to look at that. And it's important. I'm not putting that lightly, but that's not the only thing this graph is telling us. As a matter of fact, this graph tells us a story on top of another story. And we've got to be open to both sides.
So now as a leader, I see this. I say, all right, hey, I go to Chris and have a conversation and say, hey, look, there's a couple things. Look, I've got some unbiased information about you and I just wanted to share with you. Let me show you this graph, right? I bring it up on the screen. I print it out, whatever the case may be. I show it to them and say, here's how you're doing. Chris goes, all right. And you say, so it's time to get better, right? And I would like to get you there because that's my job as a leader is to make sure that you do better. There's some places that you're already doing well. Keep that up. Great job, right? Pat on the back there. But there's a couple of places that I need to help lift you up a little bit. And let me show you how I can support you in doing that. I mean, isn't that what we're supposed to do next year? Isn't that the way the conversation is supposed to go?
ideally, or instead of us as leaders going right in and say, let me see how I can help you, is tell me what you think, Chris. What are your thoughts on this? Tell me a story behind some of it. What are some of the things that you're noticing about this? Let's talk about your safe acceleration. How are you doing so well on this?
Yeah.
And actual stops made is a little different number there. What is your thoughts on that? What do you think? Why do you think that is the happen? It's as opposed to us as leaders going right in and giving our version of the story to our employee. Let's find out their version first, because then, as we talked about last time, Vinay, we'll know how to ask the right questions.
That's right.
Can't ask the right ones without knowing the story.
That's right. So we go through that process. We sit down with Chris. We show this to them. They take a look at it. They give us their understanding of what's happening and why. We say, all right, well, here's a couple of places that I think together we need to start to find a way together forward. And it's that simple, right? We just ride off in the sunset together, right?
That would be greght, wouldn't it?
Right.
If that was the magic bullet, Vinay, I think that nobody would need you or I, for that matter. We all need different perspective, and everything happens with consistency, humility,
a plan,
and what we call continuity. That's the only way, and because things change, right? Because Chris, we get that'll work this time, right? Vinay says, okay, great, Chris. The next thing you know, the next quarter, we look at this, and Chris is blowing out of the water the amount of actual stops made. She has jackpotted that, and then all of a sudden our safe acceleration has changed. It's gone down. Or okay, well, we want to have something more of a consistent balance. That's where consistency, goal setting, structure comes in, and planning comes in. But we have to, as leaders, be able to see it from a different perspective.
So I want to talk about this idea of this, what I call this tension between employee productivity and decision making, right? Because what you were kind of saying here is, let's take this information and present it to Chris. Let's see what Chris says, because part of this is understanding the problem more than it is just giving the answer. And this tension that at least I believe I've felt all the time is, sure, I may have done something for 25 years. I may have been in that industry for 25 years, but that doesn't mean that I 100% understand everything that's happening. Right? So you're never at 100% here. You're not ever 100% over here. So it's not always 100% an employee problem. It's not 100% a decision-making problem. It's somewhere in the middle there. Now, if we had a lens into seeing where it was over there, it kind of gives us some strength as a leader to have a more effective conversation with that employee, does it not?
Right. That's exactly right. It's employees are just like any, and I like cars, and there's certain things I like. I'm gonna use a car analogy, and I have driven multiple different cars in my life. I love the old classic cars, and getting into, let's say, a 1966 Camaro, right? And going to a 1966 Camaro that is a manual transmission, and in driving that vehicle and learning how to drive that vehicle is very different than learning how to drive a 2021 Camaro. Yeah. Very, very different beast, very different animal, very different car, very different way to drive, very different feel. And our employees are very similar. They're very different. Just because, like you said, Vinay, hey, it worked. I've been doing this 25 years. Well, perhaps that might be the problem. Right. Is that we've been doing it the same way for 25 years and expecting it to still work.
So here's where I want to give an example of that, right? This is, again, where the data can give us a little bit better of a perspective into what's actually happening. So I'm actually going to switch over here to another something, just to kind of give you, and I'm going to start up at the top just so you understand what we're looking at here for anyone who's listening in. So this is a study that we do for customers. We bring data in and we build this business alignment and financial impact study, or this report. What basically we do is we take all this in and we kind of compile all these metrics and start showing them where areas of concern or where they can start to pay some attention. I'm going to speed through this a little bit. This is one from September of this year, 2021. This is an opportunity graph. It tells you how much you can do better if everyone started to step up to the same level of better, how they could all be effective around the horn. this is risk. How if everyone started to reduce risk in the best way possible within your organization, how you can make that risk even smaller and mitigate your risk. But I want to talk about this thing called process strength here. Can you all see that? Is that big enough?
Yes, perfect.
So I will tell you, I try not to use these words bad and good, because bad and good are so subjective, and it means what bad and good in one company are, well, what bad and good mean between two of my two different kids that I have varies a lot.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
What is a good behavior and a bad behavior are different. So what I want to talk about here is this idea of effective and ineffective. Effective is talking about that specific thing relevant to just that specific space, as opposed to just relevant to everything. So effective and ineffective. And I want to look at process strength. Now, what do I mean by this process strength? Look, if anybody's going to work within the company, there's a process that they have to work within, whether it's specifically spelled out and there's a manual you can pull off a shelf and says block 1, block 2, block 3, and here's how you do it, and here's all the software, or here's all the people. Whatever that process is, written or unwritten, there is a process that occurs to be able to lead to a behavior. Now, there are processes that don't work, and then there's processes that really do work, and there's a 65,000 shades of gray in the middle.
Yes.
Right? Of processes that kind of work. And I think that's where most people are. So we're talking about this idea of sitting down with Chris, showing Chris what's happening, and then letting Chris come back to us saying, here's some of the challenges that I'm seeing, and saying, all right, great. Now that we've got some alignment here, go out and do more. Yeah, it's not that easy. And I'll talk personally. I'd rather know that there's something I need to be aware of, as opposed to hit it and be surprised. But I don't like surprises.
Right.
So is it fair right now? Maybe I'll walk through these process graphs a little bit, and then I'd love to hear from you all.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So this is average appointments daily. So this is a company that's dispatching their employees on a route or on customer jobs. This one on the right is the average billed daily. So they're billing their customers on a daily basis. Let's focus in on this left graph here. And I put down at the bottom here, it's effective with high certainty. What you'll see on the left-hand side is around that on the left-hand side, April, May timeframe. You can see this black line is kind of trending up and it kind of starts to float. The black line is what actually happened. The blue line is what I'll call the best possible day. And the pink line is the worst possible day, right? Highly effective day, less effective day. That black line is what actually happened. So you can see at the left-hand side, there's a lot of room for that black to move up and down. There's a lot of wiggle room. As you go towards the right there, towards September, gosh, there's not much wiggle room at all. That tells me that this process of setting appointments daily actually works really, really well. Let me stop there because I've been talking a lot here. Lou, Sherri, what are you all seeing in that graph? What is that telling you as a leader and maybe as an employee if you were to see something like this?
Well, there's a refinement that's happened, right? They've refined the process. Because you can see from May to September, there's a refinement that's happened there. There's been some changes, some adjustments that have made significant change. So whatever happened there and how that process happened needs to be duplicated for other processes. That's number one. Okay. How did that happen and who was involved? Because let's find out what they did. Let's find out how they made that process work. And let's apply it now to the other side. Yeah.
So that's right. On the right-hand side, we've got this graph that shows ineffective with average certainty. And what that means, you can start seeing in the beginning, there's a little bit, becomes a little bit more variance, right, between the blue and the pink. There's a lot more variability in what happens in the day. But over the course of May, June, July, September, August, September, that the process stays about the same. It's not getting better as far as a process. So what does that tell you as a leader, Lou and Sherri?
Yeah, definitely not be something interrupted that process. Process could be an issue, could be behaviors, but that kind of all is the symptoms, right? Definitely is a bigger story and things are falling apart and it's not being consistent.
I would agree. There's, and just to kind of sharpen this up, and Vinay, correct me if I'm wrong with these graphs, is the closer that you could bring those variances together, the better improvement of the process that's happening, because that means the performance is getting better, right? So we can shrink those spaces in between those sections. That's what we're talking about here, just to kind of give that little bit of clarity. And so, in looking at this as a leader, it is very obvious that it's not an employee issue, because everyone's doing the same thing.
That's right.
There's not much variance in performance here. If we want to sharpen this up, which there's obviously room for improvement here, but we need to look at something different than employee performance, because they're following the process, whatever's in place.
So I want to kind of take that to its sort of logical end here. So we were talking about Chris a little earlier. If we wanted to give, I mean, she was low on customer stops, right? If we want to go to Chris and say, hey, I want to give you more customer stops, more appointments to make daily, our process for giving out more appointments daily is going to work, right? And it's going to work pretty darn close every time, right? Mm-hmm. Which is good. So if she's actually low on customer stops, and I were able to see this, my process as an organization is actually working quite well. She may not know what to do. There's a training issue there. That's an employee. That's an employee aspect. So I'm not doubting myself. I'm spending more time saying I need to spend some more support with my customer. I mean, excuse me, my employee here, right? Is that the way you're seeing it?
So you hit it right on the head too. Client, customer, and employee, they're the same thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
On the right-hand side, though, so if I go to the left-hand graph and I start saying, as an organization for Chris, I want to start increasing the number of appointments. I see this as something that's actually going to work pretty well. I can actually start to drive more productivity because my employees know what to do and how to do it. The process works. That will scale.
Yep.
Alternatively, though, on the right-hand side, this graph here that says average build per day, if I keep getting on my employees or start questioning my employees, why does what you're building on a daily basis, it doesn't seem to go anywhere? Well, there's a lot of volatility. There's a lot of variability in the process here. There's something wrong with that process. So I can ask Chris or any of the other employees at the company, hey, I need you to get your billing up. I need you to start making more appointments. That doesn't actually mean that your bill per day is actually going to go up, because how much you're billing is not right. That process is broken. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, because if you can do all that all you want and give them more appointments, but if you're not sharpening up the process of billing these customers, and what's the point? You're not the profit margin's dropping. I mean, that's the bottom line right there, right? That's the risk you're taking. And how do we do that? How do we improve this now? Right? That's the ticket. How do we get this to be improved? And number one, as a leader, it's time to look at it and say, okay, what am I not doing? What am I doing and not doing that's making this happen? Because ultimately it's coming down to the process that's in place. Well,
so what this allows us to do is, so we saw that first graph that tells us a little bit about the radar chart, that spider web graph that tells us what's happening for that particular employee. We can take a look at that, and then we can drop into each one of those areas that we need to help them improve and find out, all right, if I can spend all my time and effort here on making sure that they're better braking, that they're better at braking, so that they don't have an accident. Mm-hmm. But if my process in which I train them to brake, or the process which I show them in which to go meet appointments because there's not enough time in the day, and that's why my braking keeps being high, is because they're trying to go faster to get there. I can tell them 10 ways to Sunday that, hey, you need to be a safer braker. But what I'm saying, I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth at that point in time. And I can start to identify where I'm speaking out of both sides, because I'm saying, hey, make more appointments, and you got to work longer days, but they don't want to. So they're trying to compress it, which means they're braking more, right? Yeah. And you can start to see the cause and effect between that and say, oh, that's why my insurance bills keep going up, because I keep giving them more appointments in the same amount of time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. More does not mean the better. It's because you got to give to the right spot, to the right place in order to make an improvement. And that's where the benefit of the data comes in. And this tells us where that issue is. And in this case, what we're seeing in this graph is average build per day. That's our focus. Why is this like this? How do we sharpen it? Well, one solution right off the bat we've got as a leader, need to look at ourselves and say, okay, and one of the principles that we apply here as with Sherri and I, that we have created in the 10 principles every leader must follow to lead with influence. One of those that would apply here for a leader is our ego. We've got the ego principle, which means we've got to look at ourselves and say, it's not an employee challenge here. This very well may be a process challenge, and if I was a betting man, I would bet that that's the issue here. This is a process issue. So how do I solve this process? Well, let's humble myself and let's go to the best employee who's performing, or employees that are performing at the higher level in this blue level, and see what they're doing, because somebody's doing something better than somebody else here. Find out what processes are lacking, what needs to be sharpened up, bring the right people and resources in to make it better. That's exactly what we did on the other side of this graph. Otherwise, there's no way it would have been as better, because we weren't good before. Look at May.
Yeah, I know. I love the way you're going with this whole ego principle. I mean, if you can't see that you've got the lead anchor tied to their foot, and you keep telling them, "Hey, I need you to go harder," you can go. You can be as selfless a leader as you want. You can scream and yell. You can do whatever type of leadership style you want. But if they've got an anchor tied to their foot, they're not going to be running faster.
Right.
That's
End of
it.
story. Right?
That's it. Exactly.
So this gives you the opportunity to kind of look back and say, what is it that is slowing them down? So I want them to do better. But I firmly believe that as a leader, my job is to remove the friction for all my people. And I think that's what you just said, that ego principle, and leaning into that ego principle that you all teach, and as one of those 10 principles, allow someone to say, all right, well, what do I need to inspect here? Because it may not just be them. Is that right?
Right. That's right. That's right. Because sometimes it's just so easy to do. We did it, right? I mean, it was easy to look at this graph and say, oh man, this, when we looked at Chris's graph before, why is she doing so terrible in there? And when we bring our employees in, what do we work on, right? We do the whole check the box. So how do you think you're doing? While they're talking, telling us what they think they're doing, in our minds, we already have an indication of what we think they're doing. Well, that's not going to help us. And so when we let our ego get in the way, ego is necessary. That's what provides us the self-confidence and who we are as a leader. Well, we've got to stop the bleeding, right? In this case, there's a bleeding happening, and we call bleeding. We've got to stop that bleeding. We got to let our ego go, because that's going to trickle down to your employees and those that you lead. So then you start to see inconsistencies. Oh, okay, we start to see inconsistencies. We got to see a drop in productivity. Well, maybe we need to remove our ego out of this then, and there's other side effects that go into an egocentric leadership.
Yeah.
So infection of this ego, this mentality of this egocentric mentality, it spreads. Because remember, it all starts with you as a leader, which means that now you're going to look at it from the high level overview. You need to look at your teams and look at the fact that, man, there's bleeding going on here, and it might be my fault. I'm not seeing something. You're literally bleeding your team dry, as you say, holding them down by an anchor, by letting your ego guide you in your actions and in your thoughts. Right? I mean, listen, you're hitting productivity goals, maybe, but that doesn't mean that your team isn't bleeding. All right? Do you really want to retain your good players, your strong players? Well, losing players that are solid leaders, which is what's going to happen in this case if we just keep pushing more appointments at them, pushing more work at them, thinking we're going to get better results, well, they're going to leave.
Yeah, that's right.
So the question is, do you want to retain good players, or do you want to lose them? That's what you got to look at here.
Well, Sherri and Lou, I feel like there's a couple of things, and maybe this is what we can do here, is just summarize for everyone. Maybe what are one or two things that if you were to go back today, if you were to recommend to somebody based on what we learned today, what were one or two things that you would take out of this from a leadership perspective that they could go home and do from today's conversation?
Yeah. Do you have anything that you want to point out real quick?
Well, I mean, you need a checkup from the neck up. I think we heard that from someone recently, and I
check up from the neck up.
Yeah, do that. We got to. It's that ego. It really is. It's easy to point fingers at somebody else when you have those same fingers pointing back at you. And Vinay uses that quite frequently, and I love it because it's so true. And we have to have the humility and to really stop and think, okay, what's the picture here other than what I'm seeing in your mind as a leader, but what's the picture? So step out of yourself for a moment and find out what is the picture of, and what's the story. Try to get that story from that individual or from the team, because there's always something more. We have to be able to step aside and hear it and listen.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's
I think and here's a great analogy to take away as well. I think would sum this up as a leader. Okay. Years ago, there was a story of this 4-year-old autistic child. And when I first started off years ago, my careers, I worked with individuals with different challenges, and I worked with 4-year-old deaf children, autistic children, and social work. And his name was Daniel. And Daniel had one of the challenges he had is when he would have car, and he'd have an airplane and a toy, and he would roll the airplane but throw the cars. He had it reversed. And well, why is this happening? And the parents couldn't understand, why is he throwing cars around? But he loved playing with cars, but he was always throwing them. And one of the things as my training taught me was I needed to get down to Daniel's level to see what he's doing and how he's perceiving things in order for me to help Daniel see it differently. And so as I got down to his level, watched him play, he thought that a airplane was to be rolled and a car was supposed to be thrown. Now, they both have wheels. You go buy a toy airplane, it has wheels. They both have wheels. Okay, so what I had to do is show Daniel, no, it goes the other way around. And instead of telling him and making him do what I was doing, I played with him, but I played in reverse. I was rolling the cars on the track, and I was tossing the airplane ever so gently. And I just did it as he observed. After a while, Daniel began to observe and follow my influence and learn that a plane is to be flown and a car is to be wheeled. As leaders, we're never going to understand how we can train and redirect our employees or a process until we step into the level and see it from the perspective of their perspective, and maybe learn something from that perspective so that we can say, this is what I need to do to show you how to go about doing it a different way.
Yeah, it's a good point. I'll summarize by saying that it's very easy to, I think I used this last time we spoke about this idea that your perception is your reality, but reality is not your perception.
That's right.
Being able to take a look at this raw, unbiased, objective data and being able to see it in a way that you can see the story, Sherri, as you pointed out, seeing that story. And we started at the top of this whole thing, talking about the bones and the flesh, right? You got to see them together, right? Being able to objectively see that data so that you can say, I understand what the story is here, so that you can get down to that level. That's what allows you to take action with intention. And I think that's where we all should be, is my belief.
I love it. Love it.
Right.
100% agree.
Sherri and Lou, if anybody wants to get in touch with you all and ask you all more questions, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can reach out right on LinkedIn, Facebook, as well as Instagram. Also, our website at Lou-Everett.com. We're right there for you. Our phone number is there, and you can even sign up if you have a conversation. We have our link for our calendar, and we'd love to talk with you.
And I'm Vinay at Carmo, www.caarmo.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn as well. But Sherri and Lou, anyone else who's been listening in, I hope you got some points out of this. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Hopefully this was a valuable use of your time. But Sherri and Lou, thank you so much for sharing your time with me as well.
You got it. Thanks, Vinay.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.